Okay. Hi. I've decided this live session to do a new shape for me, one that I've had going around my brain for a little bit now, which is I want to do a ladle, and I'll describe a little bit more about how I want the ladle to be. But I want the ladle to be essentially to have a wide but super thin neck, and have the width of the neck make up for the fact that there's going to be almost no keel. And I want to see how that will work. Now, in order to get that to work, I don't want to make it as big as my other ladle just because that's a lot of work and I'm not sure how it's going to go. And in general, the smaller you make something, the more chances of success you have. But even so, I took the time to try and find a really nice, clean piece of wood that has a little bit of a curve to it, but not a ton. There's a bit of a knot down here. So I'm going to break it apart now and try and find the right sort of clean piece that's going to help me get exactly what I'm looking for. And this is definitely going to go more than one live session, probably an hour and a half, maybe two, I'm guessing. It depends on it obviously depends on how it goes. Now, similar to when I did that last live axing, I can't really see your comments here, but I'm going to go bring it inside to carve so that I'll be able to see your questions as we go along. So, one of the unique factors of this thing that I'm making is that the handle is going to very closely follow the grain. It's not going to slant across the grain very much. So I need to take that into consideration as I figure out how it's going to be oriented within the piece of wood. And I think the bowl is going to be here where this squirrely grain is, because the roundness of the bowl can handle this squirrely grain just fine. Then I'm going to take this beautiful straight grain here and have that be the back of the handle. So I'm going to split off a piece here. And that's going to hopefully define the back of the handle and give me a nice clean line to ride up. Let's see how that looks. Right, so what I want is for the back of the handle to follow this grain line here, and then the bowl is going to be essentially like this within here. So what I'm envisioning, let's see if I got a Sharpie, that'll show up better, is that the handle of the ladle is going to largely follow this curvature, and that the bowl of the ladle is going to be like that. And then on this side of things, it's going to be like that, and then with a fairly wide handle, and the width of the handle here is going to allow me to make it very thin and delicate in the other dimension. So that being said, it looks to me like right about here is where I'm going to be pushing in the crank. And here's where a new form is tricky, because you have to sort of think through the process and make sure that you're not shooting yourself in the foot anywhere further along. Let me think for a second. I think that if I do stop cuts and split off the waist and the sides, that will allow me to axe down, and really all I'll be axing down is the center bit, and that will go a lot easier. So let's try that. If this goes wrong, I'll just have to do more work. Let's just swivel this just a little bit, get this centered. Okay, good. Again, everybody, I can't see you right now, but I will be bringing the spoon inside, or this ladle that I'm making inside to carve it, and that will be a chance for me to see any questions you have. And if you have questions about how I'm thinking through my process of what I split down and when, I'm happy to talk about them at that point. But right now, there's too much glare for me to see what's going on. Okay, I've got stop cut number 1. Here's where I need to sort of anticipate how wide I want my handle to be. So it's actually really helped that I've sketched it in here. Now I'm going to do my stop cut from the other side. And I'm stopping shy, maybe a 1/4 inch shy of the width of that handle so that I can adjust the width as I want and not be stuck with my initial drawing. If I understand the nuances of a design, I might push to end up closer to the drawn line, but as it is, with something new, I feel like it's always worth hanging back a little bit. So now, I come in here and split off this bit of wood. I want to be careful, try and get split. Yeah, beautiful. And the nice thing about doing this at this stage is now I have a beautiful piece of wood here that I can use to make another spoon out of down the road. So let's split the other side now. Now, one danger is when I split this side, if I have, here's the edge of the line, which means that this side that I'm splitting off is much fatter than this part that I want to keep. If I try putting the axe there and whacking down, guaranteed, because, excuse me, a split always wants to run to the narrower side, it's going to run into the handle and not out to the side the way I want to. So I'm actually going to do this in 2 stages. Beautiful. Another perfectly usable chunk. And then I'm going to split off the remainder. And because now it's narrower than the part that's being kept, it should behave itself and run off to the edge, just as I predicted. So, all right. Now, okay. So now, my idea is that really the other part that now needs to get sort of cut off is this itself forms the center of the bowl, and then the handle is actually back here, if that makes sense. And so really what I can do is, I've never done this, but I bet I could do a stop cut on the neck down to that line I just drew and split off another usable chunk of wood. Alright, I want to make sure I don't overdo it on the far side. Now, again, same principles apply. I've sawn to about here, and so that comes up to about here. But if I split it here, it's going to run off into the handle. So I need to resist the temptation of saving this perfect, beautiful piece, and instead split it roughly in half so that the split runs cleanly and evenly. I still have a nice, beautiful piece that I can make another spoon out of. But what I'm left with is the ability to make one more split now. Oh, please work out. Woo! It did! Okay. So, here we now have the nice, thin, beautiful back of our ladle. Here's the bowl, or where the bowl is going to be. Obviously, this is going to go in a little further. And then I'm left with this big chunk here that I actually can just saw off at this point. So, alright. It's going to be a bit of heavy sawing here. I want my ladle to be fairly shallow, because this amount of carving down into the end grain with a hook knife is going to be a bit of a labor. so I don't want to be too ambitious. And I also am not looking to replace my larger ladle form. In fact, I'm looking for something that can make like a nice small sauce ladle. Yeah. Whew, I need to replace this saw blade. That should not be that difficult. Okay. Alright, so now you can see the ladle form starting to take shape. And now I'm going to just kind of dress up the back here. And what I'm doing now is just kind of making the back square to the front. And that's going to help me see how much material I have to work with. So you can see that now the back is dressed. So that's roughly square with the front. I'm not going to dress the front square because one errant axe blow and I could lose some of my critical width on the bowl here. But another thing, let's see, that I am going to do is a little bit of axing down. Now, because this is connected straight through the end grain here, I have to be careful not to axe too far down because it's going to split right down through that piece of wood there. So, I'm going to do just a little more gentle sawing to get that to truly the thickness that I envision. Let's see if I can pop this material free. Super delicate here. And with kind of a snap at the end so that it can't go deeper than I'm looking for. Okay, good. Now, take the trusty Sharpie and let's envision what this could actually look like. So, on the top of the handle, if we go for, let's just see what our width looks like. I'm coming straight down in two straight lines like that. And again, I can't see comments, guys. Sorry. I'll address all questions when I go inside once this is done. So now I'm going to see what that looks like. And it's possible, you see how here it's pretty narrow if I just go with this, because it's a pretty narrow piece of wood. But if I allow this to be tilted within the grain just slightly, all of a sudden I have much more width. So one of the things I'm going to do is, how am I going to do this, is just kind of axe a bit of an angle down. Again, this is a total experiment, guys. At any point this could fall apart because I haven't thought something through. Or I just hit something that I shouldn't hit. But what I'm trying to do is make a small ladle where the handle essentially is wide, and that allows it to be very thin with no keel. Because honestly, keels on ladles just kind of bug me. So, chopping across all this end grain with the axe is a pain in the neck. But reestablishing this angle as being slightly tilted gives me more material to work with. So, good. Now what I really want is for it to be on the small side, right? I want it to be pretty small. So let's work with that. I'm making these line's pretty sketchy. And then we're going to split it off. Because this is, well, actually, no, I guess I can get in here with the club. If you can use the club, I say use the club. Has more control, but I do want to be careful not to hit the side of the handle. Otherwise, that's awkward. Otherwise, you can just go like that. That works also. So now I'm going to do this going around. Okay. Good. So now, let's see. Now let's dress down these handle sides a little bit. When handles follow the grain like this, it makes it a little tricky and awkward because in theory, it's not clear which direction the wood wants to be cut. So I find it's always good to taper them just a little bit. And I would rather taper it to be narrower at the tip here, since it's so wide to begin with. So that's why I'm axing in this direction here. Okay, now, here we go. Looking good. Now I want to get a sense for how deep I want to make this, or rather how shallow. Because I don't want to make this super duper deep, because I predict that carving across all this end grain is going to be a real pain in the neck. But what if we do something like that? What if it looks like that and that in the front? And that gives us a sense of where to go. I think it's going to be easier axing the back. So I'm going to start with the front and support it on the edge of the stump. Let's see here. So I kind of have two options. One is I could start in the front and axe this, and I'd have a pretty clear sense of how far to go by looking at the line I just drew on the side. Or I could choose to do the sides first and have a clear sense of how to go by looking at the line in the front. Doesn't matter really which one you do. You just kind of need to do one and then redraw the line you're shooting for. Yeah. On the top, on that surface that you've just axed. All right, so now let's do the back bit. Again, see how I'm using the divot in the stump to help support the whole thing so that the bottom is resting against something, the side is resting against something. It's useful to have divots in your stump, not just hard lines that are, for bracing spoons on, but sort of gradual, bumpy divots are quite useful. Okay, that's about as far as I can go without endangering cracking the whole thing. So now I pull out the Sharpie again, and I redraw the shape I'm going for. And there, and there. For anyone just showing up, I can't see any of your comments yet. I'm going to be carving this inside where I can see your comments and questions. So save anything for just a few more minutes. Okay. And you see now I can get lower down. Now that this is narrow in this dimension, it's easier for me to get down like that. So don't feel like you need to get perfectly to the line right at the bat. You can work your way down to it in stages, and that's often easier, safer, and more predictable. Okay, now I've got these sharp corners, and I'm going to just knock those off. Get myself closer. If I knock them off in a consistent manner, then I'll end up with a taper that will be more helpful to me later on. Okay. And now you can see how it's just, there's a little more of a forehead here. So now that that's nice and thin, I'm just going to knock that back so that the center of the ladle is truly under the center like that. So you can see it's actually kind of like that point there. And now I'm just gonna dress back of the ladle here. Notice that I left the back till last because I want to keep my options open. I have a bit of a natural tail flip in the wood here, which I'm going to preserve and see how that works. So that's looking pretty good. I don't think there's much more to be gained from any more axe work. So I'm going to stop while I'm ahead, just like that. All right, now I'm going to gather you up. Come with me. Whew, it's sweaty in here. Grab my toolkit. Gonna duck our way out of the hoop house. Okay, good. All right. Whew. Here we are. And we're gonna go into the house. Man, hot in that hoop house. Should have considered that. I wish I'd wiped my forehead. And in just a second here, I'll be able to see the questions. Whew. And we'll start carving this sucker. Okay. Door. Excuse me, dogs. Go on. Maisie. Come on. Good. And pull this down. Put this down. Okay. Now, let's lower that. And, alright. Take off a couple layers. Bear with me. And get my apron. And, whew. Whew. Okay. I started wearing this apron largely as a way to keep wood chips out of my pockets because they're getting in the charging port of my phone. But the extra layer also helps me helps protect my sternum. I'm going to lower this whole tripod down. Bear with me here again. And good. All right. All right. Okay. Spin around before you start and let's see your carving room. See some beautiful furniture. All right. Okay. Here's the carving room. The yellow chair from IKEA. This faces south. West. And then we're spinning to face south. This is just a hutch I made from boards about 12 years ago. And then we have our dining room table full of, my wife was doing some studying before she left to go studying elsewhere. Chairs of all different types. And then this faces south. And then we have the rest of our kitchen, which is a fridge covered with stuff, counter, and then some other counters. And that is that. Okay. All right. So, let's review. So this is a new form for me. This is one that I've had. Oh, let's get this so it's relatively level. There we go. Okay. I've had this stuck in my head for a while now. Hey, Chuck. Which is that when you do ladles normally, where the handle is angled across the grain, because the grain runs out the side of the handle, you have to keep a certain amount of thickness to the handle. And oh yeah, that writing desk is my my wife's grandmother's. It's great. It keeps us, it's letters and stamps and other stuff. So what if we had a ladle like this? The trick with having a ladle like this is that you can't make it very big unless you start with an enormous piece of wood. Which, now that I've done it, I could see how you could do that also. But it's also going to be more difficult to carve down into the end grain that's shown there. So it has its pluses and minuses, but it's something I've been wanting to consider. how thin can I make this essentially if I keep this fairly thick? So that was all of that. Are there people watching now who missed? They asked a question and I didn't see it, because now would be a good time to address any questions that have to do with sort of the exploratory process of trying a new form. And you can see how I was sort of talking myself through it. I hadn't really done any thinking about how I was going to do it. I've been doing a lot of thinking about how the form was going to work, but I hadn't thought through any of those moves that you just saw me do. But those are the kind of moves that I do whenever I do a new form, whether it's a flower scoop or a coffee scoop or a tiny scoop. I'm always thinking along those lines of, what should I do next? What's the ramifications of if I do that next? But you can also ask those questions later on. But if you have questions that I failed to see, I'm sorry. There was way too much glare out there for me to be able to see it. And hit me up with questions now, and I would be happy to answer them while I strop this knife. You threw out the flamingo ladle. I'm not sure what you mean, Debbie. Were you at? Am I saving this? You were late and missed all that design stuff. I assume so, but honestly, guys, I realized that I might have forgotten to delete the last one, so we'll see what a good job I did of deleting. I'm pretty sure I've deleted all the other archives, so there should be enough for me to save this also. And if there isn't, I apologize. This won't be the last time I do stuff like this. So yeah, I'm going to try and save it and share it and put it up on YouTube, all that jazz. But as always is the case with me and technology, sometimes I don't always do the best job. Okay, I've been loving this long strop by Tom Scandian, by the way. It just works really nicely for me to strop my tools with it, and I love that it's all in one, and I love the extra length that I get, because I hate doing 50 passes, so I'd much rather do 20 passes with this and call it good. Yeah, it's a shallow ginkgo-ish shaped ladle bowl. We'll have to see if anyone actually likes this and it turns into a thing. It'll get a bird name. And like I said earlier on, this is definitely, I think, going to be more than one live session, because it just usually is. When I'm exploring a new form, things just take longer. I'm thinking things through, and I'm explaining it to you. So I'm stropping my knife in anticipation of all that end grain that I'm going to be carving across. Maybe a shade cloth you can toss over my hoop house. That's a really good idea, Jerry. Yeah, honestly, it's all kind of new to me because I haven't done a lot of live stuff in the hoop house in winter before, where I'm trying to answer people's questions. But that's a really great point. It's kind of a trade-off where, well, it also helped make it cooler, and right now it was too bright. Yeah, I'll have to look into that. In the summertime, it's not really an issue, but it certainly is here. So, as with any form, when you get to this stage, what's important is establishing flat square sort of boundaries. So I'm going to carve one face first, and it's probably going to be the sides of the handles and then this outline here. Because if you imagine this with less crank, right? It has 90-degree crank. If it had less crank, I would be treating this rim and the side of the handle all as one thing. Yeah, during the summer, Jerry, I have my wood shop, which works really well, and it's shady and breezy, and I can see people's comments as I'm axing. Okay, so I guess I'm just gonna start feeling it out. So one thing I can tell immediately is that the steep angle of this means that I keep bumping my thumb into it. So that's going to be something that I'll have to take into account. And maybe it makes sense to do this last approach like this, so I don't bang up the side of my thumb. Okay. Good. Now I anticipate this becoming a curved transition, not a hard transition, but for now we'll leave it as a hard transition, and we'll pull in this side as well. It's kind of right directly with the grain, so a bit tricky, but I'll just have to do for now. Tricky which direction to cut it. There we go, that'll work. Okay, I'm going to knock off the corners of this to make it easier on my sternum, to press it into my chest. That's why a lot of my spoons have that curving back. I mean, A, it looks cool, but when I'm carving, if I do this early on, it just means that I don't end up with that spot here where, you know, where it really presses into your sternum and bruises you. You're doing a carve-along. You're making a new spatula. Nice. Okay, so now I'm going to do, what am I going to do? I guess I'm going to take a second and sort of redraw the shape just a little bit. And I'm using Sharpie here because I really want to see the lines that I'm doing quite clearly. But Sharpie can come back to bite you if you use a super new juicy Sharpie. You can end up with more ink getting sort of sucked into the grain than you really want. So now the question is how to find a safe way to carve this. I guess like that. I almost never use this cut on spoons, but here it does allow me to get across all that side grain there. And then here. Good. And here. Notice that I'm using the tip of my knife. The tip of the knife is just more agile. And so if you're not quite sure what you're going to need to be doing with the knife, as a default, use the tip. Because if you start to make a cut and you're like, ooh, not that cut, then you can get yourself out of it. New models, super juicy Sharpie. That is what they should call it. It's true. All right, so to do the part up here, I'm going to go, rather than try and carve across it like this, I'm going to carve down it like this. Especially at this roughing out stage, you just got to kind of figure out what's going to work, because you're trying to hog off so much material that the main thing is keeping yourself safe while you do it. When you get to a stage where it's more delicate and refined, then everything kind of gets easier. But at this early stage, mostly it's about keeping your body safe and trying stuff out so you can figure out how to do it. I remember probably the last time I did something this different from everything else was when I tried doing a flower scoop, which was the first time I'd ever done a form that sort of big and weird. And it's just a whole different set of moves. And trying to figure out how to do it without using a shaving course or anything like that was tricky. All right, so now I've carved roughly this outline. And now, thanks, man. And now I'm going to carve this top rim. And probably I'm going to carve the top rim and then this face and get this face pushed down. You can see it's a little too wide there compared to how it is there. And even there, I want to make it thinner because the whole point is that it's super thin and basically just comes right up from the back of the bowl. I've never carved hawthorn, no. What's it like? So this cut is across a whole bunch of end grain. So I'm letting it be really delicate because otherwise it would be a real pain. Here's kind of a weird cut that you can do when you're doing something. This is cherry. When you're doing something weird like this, as long as your hand is real tight to your chest, sometimes you can get the most power this way. But again, I'm not trying to go super deep. I'm trying to sort of build shallow cuts. One on top of the other. Whew. And notice how those cuts are angled out such that I'm establishing a rim that's separate from whatever's happening on the top. I want to create that rim line. And I actually have more control, although less power from this direction, so that's good. We'll do that. And now, how to do this? I really don't know. Nope, that's going to split. So what if we go like this, maybe? This is the fun thing about trying new forms. You're back to that place of just kind of trying to read the cut and what it's doing. Let's see, that is not fully enough support with it. There we go. Good. Okay. So you can see, yeah, this cherry is very well behaved, which is why I chose it for this particular job. So one thing I want is to make sure that my lines are roughly equivalent. And I can see if they're roughly equivalent by looking at it from the back. And what you can see is that this side is lower than that side. And it also has sort of more of a flat line, whereas this is angled up. So I can tell that I just need to, I'm not trying to remove this center material. That'll happen with the hook knife. But I'm just trying to go more straight across and see what sort of line I can create. Now you see how they're more close to similar. Okay, looks like I need to just push this down just a little more so I got a nice curve in that side rim. Now ladles, there's no point in having the side rim curve a whole lot because it's not interacting with your mouth, so there's no need for a curve. But a curve is easier to achieve. Even a shallow curve is easier to achieve than a perfectly straight line. So I almost always introduce some amount of curve just because that way I'm not chasing a straight line the entire time. All right, so now, let's see. Now I guess, let's see, if I want to preserve this, do I want to preserve that little hook over? Let's see here. Yes, I think I do. So that means that this part needs to be carved in this direction. To exaggerate that slightly. That's probably plenty, right? And now I'm gonna come down this way. All right, good. Now, with a cut this wide, it's very hard on your knife to do. I mean, anyone who's tried dressing a kayak spoon can tell you that the top of a kayak spoon or pocket spoon, as I call it, is just really hard to carve across something that's that wide. So that is one of the tricky things about this design. And it's one of the reasons to make sure it's perfectly radially split, because it's always going to be easier cutting across a whole bunch of growth rings like this than it is to split one growth ring from another. It might be, Chuck, it might be. We'll see. You never know. That's part of why I kept it small, was because, you know, your point's an excellent one and might turn out to be true, in which case I'll be glad that I kept it small. And a lot of times when I do new forms, they'll be small, and then I'll sort of figure out what works, and I'll scale them up, and I'll usually hit some sort of upper limit where, even knowing what works, there's like an upper limit beyond which it just sort of feels ridiculous to try and make it that big. And that's my upper ceiling. I know from that, sort of like, okay, let's ease back from that to something that makes a little more sense. time-wise. Okay, carve this down, leave it attached, because then I'm going to want to carve across it. So, all right, good. Yeah, I mean, with every design, there are things that are a pain in the neck. And part of understanding a design is coming up with ways to take the things that are a pain in the neck and sort of do a little side shuffle around them, or at least handle them as gracefully as possible. All right, now I'm going to do the back of the handle just because. As long as I'm doing these wide faces, might as well get this narrowed up. Yeah. I'm going to really push this down. The whole point of this is to make this quite thin. So let's make this thin. Yeah, this is going to be a ladle. Sort of strange ladle design I've been thinking about. I had in my head for a while now of how I might do something like this. Because the trick is, handles this wide look somewhat clunky, so it has to be mitigated by being slender and delicate in this dimension. Otherwise, what's the point? So that really involves a certain amount of really pushing it quite thin. Now, I don't necessarily want to push it all the way to finished thinness now, because chances are good I'm going to put a lot of pressure on this as I'm carving. So it has to be strong enough to withstand the pressures of carving. But I want to get it fairly close, because otherwise I'm going to be tempted to leave it too thick at the end. So I need to get it within striking distance, being what I hope it can be. There we go. All right, now I'm going to back up and do this cut here. Let's push this guy back too. So when I'm trying to do long, powerful cuts this way, that's a good way to go about it. Now that being said, I do want to preserve some of this kick up here, so actually I might not be able to do that, having gone to all that trouble. All right, so because I want to preserve material at the very tip to allow me to keep that sort of flip thing going on, I realize I can't do my usual. This is, in many ways, this is the opposite of a tail flip, right? It's designed to kind of hook around your hand that way. Because the ladle is so straight up and down, if it didn't have that little kick, it would sort of feel like you were clinging to it, right? So you want that little thing. Looks like a great set of cuts for a shave and a mule. Yes, probably. We'll see. Those are out in the hoop house. So one of the things about working in the kitchen is there are limitations to it. And sometimes those limitations are just limitations. Sometimes they lead you to places that I wouldn't have gotten to if I had just done the obvious thing. So I was trying to embrace that attitude. These are sort of long pivot cuts where I'm really pivoting on my thumb here. And the longer the knife is, the longer cut I can make, which is useful. And then to preserve this material at the end, I'm going to come in from this direction. Okay. All right. And one design consideration is I want the end to be just slightly fatter than the handle right before it gets to it. So there's a bit of a swell back there. And that's going to help it sort of sit on your hand a little bit better also. But that does mean that I now need to taper these cuts up to here. This is not Matt's, the longer knife from Matt yet. You get angry because you have a shaving horse in the kitchen. That is the limitation. My wife is very tolerant of me carving because it's how we pay the bills. And also because we found that the kitchen actually is much, much cleaner, even though there's always some odd shavings floating around, because I'm sweeping every day. And so all the other, dog hair, random scraps of thing, bits of chewed up dog toys, stuff that the kids leave lying around is getting swept up. And the whole house stays cleaner than if I'm not carving inside. In fact, there's always a point in the late spring when I start carving outside consistently and we go, ew, how come the house is disgusting? So, hot tip, if you want your wife to let you carve inside, you just have to be really good about cleaning up. Alright, so now I got the handle mostly squared away. Yeah, that's starting to feel really good. Alright. Okay. All right. So part of why I've been doing the handle first is that I want to define what the handle is going to be, before I do too much on the bowl, because I have a hunch that that's going to sort of define what I need to do. Let me find your sandpaper sharpening post. Probably the easiest thing to do would be to go to YouTube or my IGTV account, and one or the other of those has some sharpening videos that'll have a whole bunch of information about how I use the sandpaper. You're going to use that justification with your wife. Good. Okay, well, feel free to blame me, but take responsibility and clean up after yourselves. All right, so now I'm going to push this just a little bit thinner. Flare this into this line here. Good. This is not easy on the body to do, particularly. One of the problems with doing this with the spoon mule, actually, is that this is too wide to be captured by the jaws of the spoon mule. You could probably figure out how to do it with a shaving horse, but I don't really know at this point. Okay, so now we got a nice tail flip. You have to go sweep shavings in your kitchen. Good. Yes. Everyone needs to be convinced that it's okay to carve inside. It also helps that I do the bulk of the housework, so it's really not a big deal. All right, so now I'm going to do the outside of the bowl. I've got the handle roughly how I want it. Any more refinement to it is going to be in reaction to what happens here. Now, because of the way it is, because of the way I axed it, it kind of has this point and these facets, which, quite frankly, I kind of find really lovely. So let's try and keep those to some extent. Not slavishly, but just kind of use those as guide marks to help us clean up this surface and sort of dress it up to something even. I have seen ladles that have a point at the bottom, and what's nice about them, or at least the one I saw, was that it instead of sort of having a steep side, which the problem with a steep side with a ladle is it feels like it holds more, but then you got to turn it way further to get it to drain, whereas the more shallow a ladle's sides are, the less you got to turn it. You just have to do that as opposed to that. And that last little bit of cocking your wrist is a real pain. So I think what I'm going to shoot for is a shallow, sort of flare-sided ladle. What did you say? Yeah, yep. It's like an upside-down helmet, isn't it? With a really long nose guard. Hey, look, guys. Wooden armor. That's going to be the next hot thing. Sloyd armor. There you go. So, I'm deliberately not really preserving how steep it is here. Instead, I'm going to sort of push it down like that. And you can see how important it is that I established a somewhat even rim all the way around at this point, because as I'm sort of reducing this part here, having a rim that tells me how far down I can go is really important. All right, so we're continuing with our Sloyd armor. And you'll notice I'm doing something that I almost never do, which is making cuts with this arm. And that's because the way that this is done, there's just no easy way to do it otherwise. So when I get to more finishing cuts, it will be with more control. But at the start, just doing these kind of, starting out with pivoting, but then as I get further away, to some extent, it just gets easier to use force from my arm. Okay. Let's go a little bit further. Okay. Work my way around. So the thing I'm kind of dreading, and we'll see how it turns out, is hollowing. So once I get these cut, I'm going to do something that I almost never do this early in the game, which is do some hollowing, because I want to just kind of allay my fears that it's going to be a real nightmare. And if it is a real nightmare, I just want to prepare myself for that eventuality. Yeah. I want to get that point kind of centered. Yeah, looks pretty centered. Okay, just got 3 more facets to go here. Good. New topic in the Spring Carving Collective. All right, well, you guys do them, and let me know if when you've made some, and I will. I'll make a topic for you. All right, here we go. Good. That's one. Oh, it looks like this one's already done. Let's push it a little on this side. And then finally this one. Now, this might look like it's difficult, but all ladles are difficult. All ladles have a lot of going across end grain at the bottom just because they're so deep. So this is not, this is tough, but it's not any tougher than doing my other ladle. So it's not really giving me pause and thinking if I should do the design differently, because this is about how hard it is to do the other kind of ladle. All right, so now I've got this roughly dressed up, right? And now I'm going to hollow out the bowl. So, and I'm hollowing out the bowl largely at this stage, largely so that I can see sort of what I've got going on. And why not, as long as I'm preparing, just do a little quick strop so that I can make sure I'm being as easy on my body as possible. So, I've been trying to strop more and sharpen less because, quite frankly, now that I have the long strop, I just enjoy stropping so much more than I do sharpening. And as long as I do the stropping regularly enough, it really does seem to allay the need for sharpening. So, yeah, I'd say worth exploring. All right. It does. Yeah, you'd have to, is it big enough to really be called armor? I guess this isn't really big and we're calling it armor, so that's pretty funny. Yeah, I wonder if people, I bet you could come up with some sort of like, I don't know, thing to strap onto your leg and thing to strap onto your wrist that would help protect you. Not that I'm going to spend time doing that, but all right, good. Good, let's just do this. Good. All right, so now proof is going to be in the pudding, which is how difficult. So I have a bunch of sandpaper sharpening videos on IGTV and my YouTube channel these days. As Chuck predicted, it looks like this is going to get in the way. So we'll just have to see how it goes. It's all end grain, so I'm not going to ask my knife to do a lot until I get into more sort of... Once I start getting real deep and it's more swirling around the sides, it's not going to be end grain in the same way. But these opening moves are real, you know, just kind of nibble, 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 just like that. And I predict that it will be really helpful that I have this thickness here that can be brought down even thicker by removing material from here, and that's going to help me get a nice curve on the inside, because I think, as Chuck predicted, that's going to be the thing that's going to be a real pain. But we'll see. Maybe it won't be. So far, so good. End grain is always a pain to carve across, no matter how you do it. So, let's see here. Da, 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 da. Talks about Sloyd armor, or it talks about the Bodger's bib. Alright, so you can see here, I'll shift this here so you can kind of see a little bit better what I'm doing. I'm resting, in this case I'm resting on my thumb. It's not ideal, but it is allowing me to get in on this side and kind of going across it. This is hard on my hand, so I might need to stop and take a little break. Yeah, it's okay. You know, I mean, some forms, like the flower scoop, they just take a lot of hollowing, and there's no way around the hollowing. You just gotta do it. So, just trying to do this in a way that you guys can see what I'm doing. Spoon carving at craft fairs. Splinter got his breastplate made of wood slats. Ha! That's funny. Right now, just kind of exploring different ways of holding it. And now that I've gone down into the end grain and I'm starting to swirl around, it's no longer quite such a pure end grain cut, which is making it easier on the knife. And you can see the spots where it is still pure end grain are really a pain in the neck. But pretty quickly here, I'm going to be swirling around the sides, and that's going to work out well. I'm going to need to stop and stretch my hands in a little bit. Okay. I'm actually not watching what I'm doing. I'm watching how it's looking for you guys. But you can see how it's still being safe because I can't actually hit my thumb. I'm totally choked up, and it's still away from my thumb. So that's good. Feel free to check out and check back in 10-15 minutes, because while we're still going to be having conversations, I'm just going to be doing this for a while. That's just how it's going to go today. Yeah. Whew. All right. Let's talk about stretching for a second. Oh, knife sheath go. Little knife sheath. There we go. All right. So it's important to stretch. Yeah. All right. It's true, it would. All right. Notice that I'm not just doing each finger individually. Each finger individually doesn't work quite as well as doing multiple fingers in different combinations. I don't know why, like, grab several muscles at once. Whew. Boy. Doesn't help that I did a little exercise calisthenic thing earlier today. Okay.